G'day team, Hamish here from Automower Tech, and today we're going to go over finding charge station settings. So I've driven up a diagram of a sort of average to a slightly advanced install for a 450. Say 450 because it's either a 450 or a 550 or a model with 3 guide wires. And so we've got one guide wire with a driveway crossing there, reaching across the driveway up the top there. It's our driveway. We've got another guide wire that wraps right around the back and goes through some scattered trees. And guide 1 is just going around the front of the house, looping around to a remote area right over here. See, this is a basic garden with the garden right wrapped around the outside, right across the other side. 3 islands, 3 main islands here, internal islands here with smaller gardens, and these are trees over here with the tree roots is why they're island off. These trees aren't island, you can see that mower will just bump into them, which is all good. And anyway, it's more about the finding charge station settings and what they're all about. So the mower has 3 methods to find the charge plate. It's wanting to find the plate in the most effective manner. So it'll switch off the blades when it goes into the battery getting, say, between 10 and 20% roughly, depends on the model. And then it'll zigzag around. Ideally it'll find a guide wire, catch that guide wire, follows the guide wire on the left hand side back until it gets into the charge station and docks. The 3 methods of finding the charge station are a guide wire. If it doesn't find a guide wire, it'll jump onto a boundary. It'll follow that boundary right around the outside until it either hits a guide wire, catches that guide wire back, or if there wasn't a guide wire in that particular part of the garden, like here, and this was too far away to sense the guide, it will just continue to follow that guide wire around until it hit the charge plate and then jump into the charge plate. The 3rd method, other than the guide and the boundary, is the fast signal in the mower. That is a loop built into the bottom of the base plate that draws the mower in from about 8 meters. So depending on your layout of your lawn, how many guides there are, how advanced your lawn is, and the size and model will dictate which settings you want to have on your mower. So every lawn's going to be a little bit different, but we'll just talk about what will be a general purpose, ideal for most 430s, 450s, 415s, and they'll change a little bit on the smaller models, but these settings work pretty well across the board unless you've got a really small lawn. So with that fast signal that's coming out of the charge plate there that works up to 8 meters, what that's all about is internally of the charge plate, on the charge plate itself. This is a 300 series plate, and it's just good because they don't have a base on them so you can see what's going on. But we've got the 2 loops here. You can see coming out. One of them goes around the exterior. That's the fast signal that the mower jumps onto and directs it straight into the charge plate from any angle. That's why you want your plate feet on the lawn, because when it gets on the fast signal or comes on an angle, it can also realign itself in front of that plate and it's not going to get drawn into the side of a mower house, which happens a bit. And then the internal here, we've got the near signal, so that's 2 loops coming through here like that, and that's what lines the mower up directly when it gets the charge plate into the charging contacts. Without the near signal and the fast signal in the plate, the mower can't dock. So that's the key to when it gets to the plate, that's what it's going to do. So the settings in the mower from factory on the 430s and 450s and most other models, it's set 3 minutes, 3-minute delay to look for the charge station itself, and then after 3 minutes from starting to look for that from its battery at point of low and needing to charge, when it's 11 minutes, so 8 minutes after the 3 minutes, it's set to after 3 minutes it's set to look for a guide wire. So it'll bounce around in an irregular pattern and then hook onto a boundary wire, find that boundary wire, and then it'll dock. If it doesn't find that guide wire after 11 minutes, set in factory settings, we'll talk about what an ideal setting is in a minute, then it'll follow the boundary wire until it gets a guide or finds the charge base, and then it'll return or bump into the charge plate. So what my preferred settings for an installation like this on 430s and 450s, and the majority of lawns until you get down to the small ones, more when you're down to like the 310 and the 305 and the 405, because they're still relevant, but they're a bit smaller, so the settings will be a bit different. But generally, I'll set that guide to 0 minutes. So you want it to, as soon as it's on the lawn somewhere, straight away it's looking for a guide, bounces around, jumps on the guide, and then goes back home. I'll then change that boundary setting down to 8 minutes. So then if it doesn't find it after the guide after 8 minutes, it'll bounce onto a boundary, follow the boundary wire and get the wire back, and then come back to the charge plate. The reason why I do that is because the 3-minute delay on probably 90% of installs, really, unless they're small, is kind of irrelevant, because you're telling the mower to ignore the guide wire for 3 minutes. So it's going to bounce around looking for the far signal out of the charge plate for 3 minutes. So on the large lawns, especially the complex lawns, every charge cycle, every time it's going to go back to the charge plate, you're literally wasting 3 minutes. So 0 for your guides is the best setting. From that, then you can narrow that down to the boundary depending on how complex it is and how hard it is to get back to the charge plate. You can extend that out or drop that back down. But normally I'm 8 minutes to 6 minutes. In between that round, 8 or 6 minutes pretty much. But the majority I'll just set it to 8 minutes because I really want them to jump on that guide wire and hook back home. The other fault that some people will do is they'll turn off their boundary wire. Sorry, not turn off their boundary wire, they'll turn off the boundary, so then that keeps looking for a guide and it won't find a guide, and then it gets stuck. So if it was over here and it bounced around and it didn't find the guide and the boundary was turned off, it would just keep looking for the guide, and then it would eventually find that guide, because the battery's going to take 30 minutes or more to get flat before it can get home. But that would have mean that it was stuck behind here for like 10 or 15 minutes. Unlikely, but for example it would, and then the boundary's not on, then it would find the guide and then go back. But if you had a narrower finding the boundary, tracking the boundary, it would have either traced it round one way, hit a guide that way, traced it round this way here, hit a guide there, and then gone home. So it's going to be more efficient. It's all about getting that search time in your app down, your overall mowing versus your search time. A lot of mowers I'll bump into have got a 5 or 6% search time, and that's because settings are incorrect on here, or the boundary settings aren't correct when they don't have guides. But always put your guides in. I know they will perform without the guides, but as soon as you get complexity, they're not going to perform nearly as well. The other thing about the guide wire is it not only helps the mower get to the charge station, it helps the mower get back out to these different areas. So if you have the tail of the guide, where it finishes is significant as well as where it travels through the install, because the mower is going to want to go to the ends of the guide to reach those outer parts of your garden certain times when it knows it needs to mow down there. And if you have the ends of your guides too close to each other or not in separate areas, then it's going to end up at the end of each guide randomly more often in that one area. So if you can spread out where the tails of the guide go as well as the area that they cover. So we'll go through the mower and see the settings in here. So what you want to do is go menu. This is on your phone as well, but we'll just go through the mower because everyone could do it in the mower if you didn't have an app or something like that. So we'll go, you want to go menu, installation, or on your app you want to go more and settings, and then you want to go to finding charge station. You'll see on here that the guide is set for 3 minutes from factory, boundary to 11, and charger for max. We want to go into the guide and change all three to 0 minutes. So we're going to go 0, 0, 0 that out, go back, and then go to your boundary, hit OK. You're on 11 minutes, just go that one to 8 minutes, and then go back. As you go back, you'll see that it's already saved. Charge plate, you want to leave that on max. So it's either max, medium, or low. And that's how far that signal is going to come out of the charge plate. The only time that you would turn that down is if you had an obstacle in the way. So if you had something that was close within that 8 metre range, you might set that down to low. Or if you had a bigger obstacle in front of the plate, then you definitely would want that on low, because it's going to try and draw in from the other side of the obstacle. That's where people also get caught out if they put the charge plate on the back side of a hedge. So if there was a hedge here and it was on, the charge plate was here, it would try and come in and sense that from 8 metres on the other side of that hedge, and it would be like, I want to get there. It would be bumping into the boundary, it wouldn't go anywhere, but it would continually want to be drawn into that, because that's direct line and the most efficient way. When it's on that, it doesn't care about anything else, it's going to go straight in there. So it's always good that you have a clear space where your charge plate is. Ultimately 50% of of the center of the install. So in this example we've put it here, but it would probably be a smidge more ideal here, so that some of your guide wires can go both ways. But if you had a charge plate all the way here, this guide wire would have to go a long way to get right the way around. It almost wouldn't be economical, and that would be way too long, especially in a large install. If you do have a smaller install, that's all different. You might have the charge plate here and you're only going to have one basic loop going around here. That would be ideal on a one guide wire system. So to sum it up, 3 search methods. We've got the guide wire, that's your number 1. Help the mower find that charge plate the most efficiently through your guide wire. Number 2 is your boundary. It's always going to be able to track on the boundary if your guide wire, say, doesn't work, or it had a failed joiner and you put a spade through it or something like that. You can always go back on the boundary. Always install your guides though, and then you've got your charge plate bar. Hope that helps, guys. If you've got any questions, just shoot them below, and hopefully it made that clear. So cheers, we'll see you in the next one.